Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Monroe.
Hi, so today Neil and I are going to be running through this asbestos CPD for you. So as an overview of what we're going to be covering, we're going to cover asbestos products and their uses, asbestos survey types and what you should expect, the survey process and any annual requirements, surveyor competence and how to check for that, contractor competence and how to check for that, and survey report expectations. So a little bit about myself. I'm Ian Stone. I'm a director of Acorn. I've been in the industry for just short of 19 years, and I've carried out every kind of role within the industry, from surveyor to analyst to lab analyst. Also spent a little bit of time kind of outside of the main workings of the industry. I was a manager of ATAC, which is the trade association for the asbestos industry. And whilst there, I helped put together some industry qualifications. So without any further ado, what I'm going to do, I'm going to hand you over to Neil, who's going to introduce himself, run through the first half of this slide deck with you, and then I'll pick up the rest with you after that.
Hi, I'm Neil Monroe. My background is very similar to Ian's. Kind of sort of mirrored the same sort of path. So I've started as a trainee in the asbestos consultancy industry. Again, undertaking all manner of site works, from surveys to project management of asbestos removal works, working in the labs, and overseeing some big old projects. Again, I've worked for asbestos removal contractors, and I've also done lots of training. So training lots of different people on the risks associated with asbestos. And for that was under the UCATA banner. So me and Ian we've had a bit of an idea to try and make things a bit easier to understand within the industry. We found a lot of our clients were struggling with getting to understand the asbestos regulations, the terminologies, and so what we did, we kind of wrote this book called Asbestos Dark Arts, which is available on Amazon. It was a number one bestseller on there in a couple of genres. So yeah, if you need to get a copy of that, let us know, because we're offering free books out to anyone that wants them. So if you go onto our website, acornas.com, at the top banner you'll see there's a drop down for free books. So go on there, get yourself a copy. And we also, under the same sort of theme of getting sort of easy to understand information out to everyone, Ian and I host a weekly podcast, all to do with asbestos, and it kind of we've tried to sort of answer all the burning issues, all the burning questions that a lot of our clients come across or have asked us in the past. And it also includes some of the basics as well. So, that's asbestos surveys, awareness training, emergency procedures, kind of every kind of theme we've kind of covered, and we're still going. And again, if you want anything covering on the podcast, we have also got a Facebook community. So if you go onto Facebook and search for Asbestos Knowledge Empire, you can kind of find us, connect with us, join the group, and you've got instant access to both Ian and myself. So if you have got any sort of burning asbestos questions, you can contact us on there. So, start the CPD. So what is asbestos? Usually when we're face to face, we kind of get lots of different answers. Some people think it's a man-made substance, but it's actually not. It's a naturally occurring silicate mineral or rock, which is fibrous in structure. If you look at this photo, you can actually see the veins of the asbestos that are formed within the rock formation. Just there, you can see the person's hand with the glove on, and these are actually the asbestos fibre that's been sort of formed in this rock itself. So there's 6 types of asbestos. Of the 6 types, there's 3, we called it the big 3, that were commercially utilised. And they are chrysotile, which is commonly known as white asbestos. There's amosite, which is commonly known as brown asbestos. And then there's chrysotile, which was commonly known as blue asbestos. Now, these were the big 3 that were utilised across the country, around the world, in fact. But of these 3, there was, a giant one that was used so much, and it kind of makes up about 90 to 95% of all asbestos products that were used in this country, the UK, and that was chrysotile white asbestos. So that really was used in lots and lots of different materials to create asbestos products. So that was the big 3, and there are 3 other types of asbestos, but these were not used really on a commercial sort of scale, but you can come across them. They were used in minor products, and they are tremolite, actinolite, and phospholite. So you can we are, when we're analysing samples in our lab, we are looking for all 6, and mainly come across the big 3, but now and again the other 3 do come up. Sometimes, rarely in intentional products, but sometimes they do come up as more of a contaminant. So where they've been using the other 3 or mining the other 3 types of asbestos, they would have come across maybe pockets of the other types of asbestos. They would have just added it in and sold it on. So that's 6 types of asbestos. So how many products have contained asbestos? Okay, usually we get lots of different banded figures. But most people are quite shocked by the amount of asbestos products that have been found to contain asbestos. And that's over 5,000 products. So 5,000 products that have been identified as individual products, so new products that contain asbestos. And these range from lots of different things. The important thing to highlight here is when people think about asbestos, they usually think about asbestos that's been used in construction industry, so materials that have been used to build buildings or refurb buildings, or kind of in the actual structure of the buildings themselves. However, asbestos was used in lots of other things. So yes, the construction of buildings is probably the main areas that it was used, but we call these factory built or manufactured items asbestos was also used in. And some examples out here on the screen are hair dryers, irons, toasters, toys. Toys even contained asbestos, or have been found to contain asbestos. And even recently, we've found cases where asbestos has intentionally or unintentionally been used in toys, particularly coming from China, where asbestos, is still being used in these types of countries. So, just something to be aware of, that asbestos has been still imported into this country illegally, known or unknown by the manufacturer. That's a different question, but there has been lots of cases recently that has happened. So the important thing to think is, when we talk about asbestos, it's not just the materials in the building, but it's also materials or items within the building itself, which we may need to work on during our works that could contain asbestos, and we need to understand those risks as well. So here's a list of materials which are found to contain asbestos. As I said, it's approximately around 5,000, and that's just a kind of guesstimation of the figure of the amount of different products that contain asbestos. And just to highlight a few, so we've got asbestos cords, curtains, asbestos wicks, even baby powder at one point contained traces of asbestos, and that was commonly known. So in the Second World War, when the rations, part of the ration pack, you would get some baby powder, and actually on that ration pack it would say may contain asbestos. But at the time, there was no kind of public awareness of the dangers associated with asbestos, so that was okay to do at that time. Moving on, so again, lots of different products been used for asbestos. Obviously, when you get these slides, you can kind of read all the different ones at your leisure. Just to highlight some more, so we've got duct tapes, we've got expansion joints, putties, asbestos sheets, insulation coatings, and even more. So lab hoods, patching plaster, popcorn poppers, textured paints, wood fibre plaster, lots of different products. So we're just going to take you through some unusual ones. So here on the screen we've now got an old hairdryer. Now this is probably 1950s, 1960s hairdryer. So at the time, these are kind of newer products, new uses of plastic, and they weren't they weren't as good at holding or retaining the heat as maybe the modern products that we're sort of familiar with today. And therefore, the hairdryer heating element, to protect it from melting the plastic and obviously causing a fire, the hairdryer was lined with an asbestos paper. And as you can see there, the white sort of cardboard looking paper is pretty much 100% compressed cross-hole white fibre. And here we've got what looks more like a kind of an oven glove or a soldering mitt. Now this I actually bought off of eBay a couple of years ago, and this is just another example of asbestos products that are still available or still able to be sold into the UK market illegally. These were manufactured in China and freely available to buy on eBay. Now this is 100% woven white cross-hole asbestos fibre made into kind of a glove, and this highly friable and easily gives off asbestos fibre through minimal disturbance. Even opening that packet would release cross-hole fibres. Here we've got some woven insoles to probably some boots. As you can see, they look very, very uncomfortable, itchy, scratchy, horrible. Why you'd want to use those as insoles is beyond me. But these are just examples of how asbestos was everywhere. It was used everywhere. If there was a way that we could use asbestos, we were using it in kind of every part of normal day-to-day life. And here's an advert for those insoles. And the marketing behind asbestos was quoted as the magic mineral. So it was at the time it was like kind of the best thing that you could use for its uses. So it was resistant to fire, resistant to chemicals. It could be spun and woven like cotton. It could be used practically in all industries and all walks of life. And here's just an example of the marketing that was behind asbestos. And here it's being sold, pitched as a kind of a cure to corns, bunions, and inflamed and perspiring feet. I'm not sure if there's any truth in that, whether asbestos can cure or help with any of those ailments, but this was kind of the mentality around the use of asbestos at that time. Here we've got some washing dish towels. So it wasn't just in kind of work life. These materials were in our homes. We were doing the washing up. We were drying our washing up with asbestos and probably using them to kind of lift out hot pans from the ovens. So yeah, asbestos really was everywhere. And here is an example. So if you can picture the scene, it's Christmas time. We've decorated the tree. We've got the lights on the tree, the decorations on the tree, and just to finish it off and give it that ultimate winter, Christmassy wonderland feel, we can place some asbestos snow on the tree. And if you actually read the directions, so for best effect, sprinkle on a tree after it's been completely decorated, easily removed from rugs and carpets with a vacuum cleaner, can be used over and over again. Okay, so every year we can get this box out, a box of 100. This is 100% crossed-hole white asbestos. Sprinkle it on the tree. When we're done with it, we can just kind of sweep it up, put it back in the box for next year. Any other little bits that have been left over, we can just vacuum them up. Now, the worst thing that you can do with asbestos is vacuum it up with a normal vacuum cleaner, because what happens is the vacuum cleaner sort of sucks it up, breaks up the fibres even more, and those tiny fibres then get blown out the exhaust pipe, and it then becomes airborne and we breathe them in, and that's a real big kind of no-no. That's where the risk from asbestos kind of comes in when we're kind of breathing in those fibres. So if you ever come across, if you're unfortunate to come across an asbestos emergency or where asbestos has been disturbed, please do not or ever vacuum it up with a normal vacuum cleaner, because that is really a massive, massive problem. So here's a couple of examples of the uses of those, asbestos snow. We've got a couple of films here: Bing Crosby's White Christmas and The Wizard of Oz. And if you remember these scenes, they're actually using the asbestos snow exactly the same as what you just seen in the previous slide. And it was big in the film and the movies in Hollywood. They're big users of this type of thing, where snow scenes were used. It was always usually across our white asbestos. And this is just a photo of, looks like a white stick with some fibres out at the end. If anyone can guess what that is, it's actually a cigarette. Now, this cigarette was made by Kent Cigarettes around the 1950s, and they created the Micronite Filter. It was kind of marketed again as the ultimate safe cigarette, so to protect the smokers from the kind of the harshness effects of nicotine. They created this special filter, and it contained crystalline blue asbestos. Now, anyone taking a drag or inhaling smoke from this cigarette would not only be getting the harmfulness and the harshness of the cigarette itself, what that contains, the nicotine, the tar, but it would also be getting millions of microscopic fibres of crystalline blue asbestos into their lungs as well. So it was kind of a double hit. But again, this is just another example of how asbestos was used and how much it was used in life, in day-to-day life. If there was a product that they thought could be improved by adding asbestos, then it usually was. And that was kind of the rule of thumb that was kind of used when asbestos was in its height during those times. So moving on then. So I'm now going to talk about asbestos surveys. So asbestos surveys kind of usually referred to, or were previously referred to, as Type 1, Type 2 and Type 3s. The guidance that was put together around 2010, so for the last 10 years, and the names of the asbestos survey types were changed, and they're now called management surveys, refurbishment surveys and demolition surveys. Now, sometimes you may have come across the terminology refurbishment and demolition surveys, because the guidance was kind of a little confusing and kind of patched those two together. Now, essentially, they used the same techniques, but there is kind of a clear difference between a refurbishment and demolition survey, and we'll kind of go through that as we explain the three different types. So, management survey, you'd have this survey undertaken when you're looking to manage asbestos. So as the name suggests, you'd have a management survey if you're looking to manage asbestos within a property. It's usually undertaken during normal occupancy of a building, so you don't have to decamp or move out during the survey being undertaken. It does access everywhere where you would essentially expect a normal maintenance person to go. So you'd expect a normal maintenance person to kind of access into suspended ceilings, into riser cupboards, perhaps under easily liftable carpet tiles, anywhere where you'd kind of expect any general day-to-day maintenance to happen. This survey would cover that. It is a sampling survey, so it would collect any samples which are suspected to contain asbestos. Those samples will then be taken for analysis to confirm whether they do contain asbestos or not. It's a non-destructive survey, so it won't actually cause any physical damage to the building other than the sampling locations. There's no kind of general making good or repair required for these types of surveys. So what will you see then? So generally speaking, The surveyors, in a normal site where it's safe to do so, they'd be wearing the PPE and RPE that they would need to for that site. In specifically, if there was any high vis vest, boots, hard hats, any requirements for those, they would be wearing those. They wouldn't be kitted up fully. They would be for any sampling that's required during those surveys. So, you may see them putting overalls on or respirators on when taking samples, but that would kind of generally be it. If they'd identified any high risks areas while they're undertaking those surveys, then they would then kind of escalate their requirement for any PPE or RPE. So what we see from kind of a sampling locations, again, if you can see these two photos here of the same location, the surveyor's taken a sample of the texture coating on the ceiling on the left-hand side of the screen. On the right-hand side, you can see where the sample's been collected, and then it's been repaired utilising a paint. So the surveyor's collected the sample, and then to make good that location, they've painted over. So that's kind of what you generally see from a sampling locations. Now, this may be different depending on the material. Sometimes fillers used, or sometimes expanding foam, or glues are used to adhere to the surface. So that's really the level of damage that you'd expect from a management survey. So what is a refurbishment survey then? So we're kind of moving up the scale of intrusion and destruction. And as the name suggests, a refurbishment survey would be undertaken when you're looking to refurb an element of your building. It's designed to identify asbestos, which may also be hidden within the structure of the building. So, for instance, if you're looking to take a wall out as part of your refurbishment survey, this survey would inspect within the cavity. So not only the surface of the wall, so what the wall is made up of, but what was inside the wall itself. This survey would inspect in those areas. So it is an intrusive and destructive survey. Because of that, we need to look into hidden areas and hidden elements of the building. So the holes will need to be created. Because of that, these surveys generally can't be undertaken during occupancy. So just from a risk point of view, if we're opening up walls, we don't know what's in those walls, or floors or ceilings. So therefore, as a precaution, it needs to be done in a controlled manner by the surveyors themselves, who would be wearing PPE and RPE, etc. As the name suggests, it is fully intrusive and destructive, but it is in line with the specification. And this is kind of what differentiates between a refurbishment and demolition survey. Refurbishment surveys are always geared to your proposed works. So whatever you're planning to do for a refurb, this survey is designed to match that exactly. There's a couple of important points to bear in mind. The surveyor would need to know exactly what you're planning to do, so the asbestos survey can be mapped and geared towards your proposed works. And there's two reasons why that is. One, so we inspect, or make sure we inspect all of those areas where you're planning to disturb and refurb. But additionally, so the surveyor doesn't disturb areas where you're not planning to do works. Because what you don't want to happen is have holes in a wall where you're not taking out or you're not planning to do any works. Because then you're going to have additional sort of making good requirements just because the survey's included everything. I hope that makes sense. So important things to remember. The asbestos surveyor will always need the full scope of works. As much detail as you can include with that needs to be given to the asbestos surveyor so they can make sure everything is included. Existing plans are always good, so we can match the existing to the proposed plans. So you can marry those up on site and look for what's being undertaken. Information is needed, so all areas are inspected. And as I said, so we don't damage anything that you're not planning to do works on. These are the types of plans that we really do like. As you can see, you can clearly see from the plans what's happening, what walls are coming out, what rooms are changing. Also, you've got the scopes as well. the written detail of exactly what's happening. That's really helpful for our surveyors to kind of gear that asbestos survey so we get it right first time. So what you see, again, as I said earlier, because of the intrusiveness of these surveys, we're opening up areas which we don't know what we're going to find. The asbestos surveyors will be taking the kind of precautions that you'd expect by protecting themselves with PPE, so coveralls and respirators as well, as we're opening these up these areas. And again, these really do need to be undertaken in occupied areas. So what you see, so again, a bit more damage because we're opening these hidden areas open. As you can see by these different photos on the left hand side, you've got a fixed ceiling, tile ceiling. So to access the void above, we're taking the tile out so we can get in and inspect the areas, see if there's any suspect asbestos materials within the actual void itself. The centre photo is a photo of a plasterboard ceiling, and again, so we can inspect within the void, inspect within the cavity. We've had to create and cut a hole into that plasterboard ceiling, so again we can get in and inspect those areas. The photo on the right is an example of getting the right level of scope and information. So here you've got a floor screed within a property, and as you can see by the photo, there's multiple layers of screed, and the client specified to us as part of the asbestos survey scope was planning to take out all the screed back down to the original concrete subfloor. Now that's really important information, because if we hadn't had that information, we may not have taken all the levels of screed out on this for the purposes of inspecting if there's any asbestos. Now you can see from this photo where we've taken the layers of screed off, all the way at the bottom is the original concrete floor, which had an original asbestos floor coating which was stuck to the floor with an asbestos adhesive. Now if we hadn't had that information, we wouldn't have necessarily gone all the way down to find this asbestos product. So it's just an example of getting the right scope across the asbestos surveyor so they can make sure they include everything that you're likely to disturb during your refurb. So what else might you need to consider? So when can this survey be undertaken safely? This is really important because usually, unless you're refurbing the whole property, everyone's going to be moving out for the entire process, and you're going to start with an empty building, refurb it, and then let the new people in. That's kind of an easy way of doing it. But 9 times out of 10, with a refurb, you're still occupying the building, and you're probably doing piecemeal elements of it because you still need to, keep the building operational. So that kind of throws in a couple of scenarios where you need to consider when can the asbestos surveyor undertake the survey safely. You may need to consider it needs to be done in 2 sort of phases. So when you're still fully operational, we can get in and kind of survey most elements of the building and then come back when you're then about to start refurb to finish any elements that we can't get into. This kind of throws up different sort of problems, so you then risk not finding all the asbestos until kind of last minute and you're about to start the refurb. And if you've got timescale issues where you need to have a quick refurb to get operational, particularly in shops or retail elements where every day that you're shut or closed down you're losing money, finding asbestos at the last minute can cause all sorts of delays in notifications, program asbestos removals, etc. So kind of a business view on where you want to kind of direct that. It may be that you can decamp everyone out and we can get in and do a full survey, and then make good. So then you can move back in. So there's lots of different things that needs to be considered. The ultimate goal is to find all asbestos as early as possible, so everything can be planned within the refurbishment. But there is caveats to that on whether to keep your building operational, whether the asbestos surveyor can actually survey everything in those timescales. One kind of common areas which do cause problems is security of the building. So, if you're removing doors, windows, roof linings, these are really kind of hard to do up front without obviously making good. If you've got to take a window out, it's hard to kind of take that window out without damaging it unless you've got skilled tradespeople on site. So there's lots of things to consider. And again, as I said, the intrusive inspections for these refurbs has to be undertaken in unoccupied areas. So it's timing those surveys around the occupants if you're still, looking to kind of be in the building at the same time. Reinstatement, as I said, is always something to consider where, you're having the survey undertaken, up front with quite a bit of time. And also air monitoring. If you're having an asbestos refurbishment survey undertaken and you've got people reoccupying the areas afterwards, for their reassurance, they may require some reassurance to say, is it safe? I know if somebody's undertaken an asbestos survey, as soon as people hear the word asbestos, they get nervous. And for their reassurance, it's good practice to have asbestos air monitoring to prove that it is safe for them to reoccupy those areas. So what is a demolition survey? So kind of as the name suggests, this survey should be undertaken prior to any demolition works. And it is different to a refurbishment survey because kind of the scope of this is we need to find all asbestos that's located within the building, which again may be hidden within the structure itself. The scope of this survey is pretty self-explanatory. It's to find all asbestos prior to demolition. It's totally intrusive and destructive. However, there is a caveat to that. Although we have to open up all elements of the building, the surveyors are kind of limited to the tools that they use. If you think about if you've ever seen a building being demolished, it's always demolished with kind of big machines. Now, there is elements of buildings which are only going to be opened up with those machines, kind of dismantling them. So there is always that element of a building which physically the surveyors can't get into. That said, 99% of the building should be opened up as much as possible. Due to the destructive nature of these surveys, they can't be occupied after the asbestos survey has been undertaken. So what you see, again, as the same as the refurbishment surveys, because we're opening up hidden elements of the building, they're intrusive, destructive, dirty, sort of surveys, dusty, you will expect the asbestos surveyors to be wearing full PPE and RPE for that. So here's a few photos of an asbestos demolition survey. As you can see by the level of destruction and intrusion on these photos, we're opening up risers, we're taking out windows, taking up the window boards themselves, we're getting into even brick cavities within the actual building itself. So again, they are fully intrusive. And again, really, you can't really occupy these buildings after it, just because they've kind of been broken beyond use. And here's just the centre photo. If you can see the two white tiles, that's just an example of hidden asbestos which is found during these types of surveys. Somebody has used the asbestos insulating board packers just to kind of level up the actual window board itself. Again, you wouldn't have found that during a management. You wouldn't have found that during a refurbishment survey unless the scope was taking these windows out. But again, because the demolition survey is pretty much full access throughout the whole property itself, before the building was demolished, these packers were found. Here's a couple of more photos, just examples of the level of intrusiveness of these surveys. And the key point here where you've got a radiator that was on the wall. Behind the radiator there was a hidden chimney. But that's another key point. To enable these types of surveys, they need to be the site needs to be decommissioned, so electrics off, all plants and equipment decommissioned, drained down where you've got heating systems. So that, again, these are kind of points that need to be considered when you're commissioning these types of surveys. And that's the same with the refurbishment surveys as well, where you're upgrading heating systems, electrics. They need to be considered at the survey point as well. So the survey process. Okay, so we go from zero knowledge of asbestos within your property, to full knowledge of asbestos. Usually that starts with having a management survey, so kind of generally where the maintenance person will always go on a day-to-day basis in management of that building. And then over the years we may have lots of different refurbishment surveys in line with the scope of works, so covering all the different refurbs that have taken place within the building. And then the building's kind of coming to the end of life. You may have an asbestos demolition survey, which is fully intrusive, and it inspect all elements of the building. But it's only kind of when we get to this point in this photo, so when the actual building is fully demolished and even the slab has been taken out, do we have full knowledge of what asbestos may have been contained in that building. So it's only when the building is completely removed and completely gone do we 100% know and have full knowledge of what asbestos was in that building. Okay, assisting the demolition process. So this is an extract from the Asbestos Survey Guide. So HSG 264 Asbestos Survey Guide states, it's now recognised that even with complete access demolition surveys, all ACMs may not be identified, and this only becomes apparent during demolition itself. Okay, so I want to talk about asbestos re-inspections now. The HSE states, if you actually go onto their HSE website and look about all the asbestos information, they actually state that re-inspection should be undertaken at least once a year. And the reason for this is to check whether the materials have degraded or deteriorated over that time, and whether the actual condition of those materials have changed. And if they have, you need to update the material risk assessment for that. And also update any plans that are associated with those, with the asbestos register itself. So yeah, check materials at least once a year. The approved code of practice. So the approved code of practice is the guidance that gives guidance on the asbestos regulations themselves. And that actually states, as a minimum, the management plan, including the records and drawings, should be reviewed every 12 months. So how do you get the right asbestos surveyor? So HSE strongly recommend the use of UCAS accredited surveying companies. If a company is not UCAS accredited, it's the person employing the company's responsibility to check that they are competent to complete this work. Now the HSE, when the approved code of practice and the guidance for asbestos surveys was updated, they actually wanted to put in, and they wanted to say that you must use a UCAS accredited surveying company. However, the competition around that wouldn't let them. So this was as powerful as they could say it, was they strongly recommend the use of UCAS accredited companies. So if they're not UCAS, how do you check whether an asbestos surveyor is competent? So there's lots of different things that you can ask. There's lots of different questions, so you can evaluate whether they are competent or not. And even if they are UCAS accredited, these are good kind of questions and points to raise to check their competency. Just because they're UCAS accredited, again, with any company, you're going to get a varying scale. You get the just scraping through accreditation, and then you get some up that are, exceeding and doing even more than what UCAS requirements are. And then obviously there's a gulf in between those two. So it's good. This is good tips for you to use when you're selecting any asbestos surveyor. So a couple of questions that I'll kind of run through is their training? Is their training sufficient? Have they got the right qualifications and experience? And most importantly, experience of working on your projects, your sites. your types of building, because, as you know, there's lots of different building types, different ages, different construction. And if you haven't got the right experience, you're probably not going to have the right knowledge of those types of buildings. So that's really a strong point to kind of question. And although the company may have that experience, does the individual surveyor have that experience? Lots of people commission asbestos surveys all the time, and they always ask for the company experience, but they never or don't always look for the individual surveyor's experience. What experience have they got? The experience of working on your types of sites. Another couple of key ones is, are they independent and impartial? Really, if you look at asbestos surveying, there's two ways or two kind of types of companies. That there's either consultancies which do asbestos surveys, but sometimes or individual surveyors themselves, but there's also asbestos removal companies that do asbestos surveys. Now, where this comes into question is, if you're employing somebody who takes asbestos removals, sometimes it's hard to separate the recommendations that the surveyor of that company may provide you, because, and there is evidence of this happening, where they may sway their recommendation further towards remediation or removal, rather than giving you best practice advice on what you should do to minimise exposure to asbestos. And that's kind of where the independence and impartiality kind of comes into question. Are the recommendations that the asbestos surveyor can provide you fully independent and impartial? Because an asbestos surveyor whose only job and company is to help you identify asbestos and give you the best advice, because there's no kind of commercial interest in providing that advice, so there's no removals off the back of it, no remediation, so that's fully independent. So always question that and have a look at the company that you're employing to undertake asbestos surveys. Have they got a vested interest in kind of finding asbestos or not? Again, you can go on to the standard questions are they working to the appropriate guidance? If they're still mentioning MDHS 100, then you know they're out of date, because that guidance came out, went to the wall in 2010, so they're well out of date. And it's kind of those little things that should sort of spark alarm bells and stuff. What kind of checks do they have in place? Now, if you're a UCAS accredited organisation, you have to do audits. You have to do re-inspections. So the surveyor has to pass so many audits to be authorised in different categories, so whether it's domestic, commercial or industrial, and they have to be audited constantly to keep that authorisation. And as a minimum, we have to do 5% re-inspection. So all the surveys the surveyors do, we have to audit and re-inspect 5% of their works to make sure they are still doing the job as they should be. And if you haven't got that accreditation, or if they're not doing that, then there's kind of questions, or there's gaps to kind of look into. And particularly, if you're an independent surveyor, one-man band, you may think you're doing the right job, but if no one's checking it, or you're not getting it audited or just checked, are you going to be doing the job 100% of the time? So just a few points to kind of consider with regards to checking the competence of asbestos surveyors. To make things a little bit easier for yourselves, we've created a couple of forms which essentially ask the questions that we've just kind of covered, and you can download that from our website. Just click on that link and you can download that form. You can put your logo on it if you wish, and if you are commissioning asbestos surveys, or you employ asbestos surveyors, send them across this form. For any kind of surveyor that's any sort of weight in gold or worth their salt, they should be able to find these questions, fill them in, really easy, answer them no problem, because everything's in place and they're all covered. Or, as I said, if you are UCAS, UCAS does check all these elements, and the kind of the UCAS accreditation you're looking for asbestos surveys is the inspection body accreditation, and for the test elements, so the lab works, you're looking for the ISO testing laboratory, so this symbol here, and that's working to ISO 17025 and 17020. And here at Acorn, we meet all those requirements and we're UCAS accredited for both elements of inspection and testing. So how do you get the right contractor then? So kind of in the same vein as selecting an asbestos surveyor, checking competency. Now you haven't got the same kind of badges to look for on the removal side because there is no UCAS accreditation for their types of works. However, for a licensed contractor, they have to be licensed by the HSE. Now, a licensed contractor, as the name suggests, will undertake all elements of asbestos works, licensed and non-licensed works. You can use a non-licensed asbestos contractor to do non-licensed works. However, they don't, because there's no licensing, they haven't got the same checks as if they were a licensed contractor being audited and granted a license by the HSE. So we would always recommend using a HSE licensed contractor for any type of asbestos works. They're just more geared up to it. They've got everything in place to handle any asbestos situation. Other things to look for on the contractor competency side is any additional ISOs. So, quality management systems, safety systems, any additional kind of CHAS construction line, any additional sort of safety accreditations that they've got. Are they members of trade associations, particularly ARCA and ACAD, who do external audits? So they do external audits to check their members are working in line with their set criteria. So that again is a kind of a benchmark on contractors who are members of these associations, that they're doing a bit more than possibly the ones that aren't. And financial stability. Now this is a big one to check for with regards to asbestos contractors, because with asbestos removal works there's a big massive kind of upfront cost that they need to kind of front load to get a project off the ground before they can invoice the client. And because of that, there is fluctuations in the financial stability of those contractors sometimes. What you don't want to have is if you've got, a financially unstable contractor on your projects, it's kind of getting halfway through a project and they go pop or they go bust, and you end up with half finished enclosure. Another thing to consider with the contractors, and again the same with asbestos surveyors, is have they got DBS checks? And also, are they working to the right plan of works? And right at the bottom there is references. References is a really good one to kind of gauge the opinion of others on this contractor. And don't get me wrong, a contractor's never going to kind of offer you a reference from a bad job that they've done. But if you can get the details of the client, get the details of that person so you can contact them and just kind of ask them some questions on how was the job, how did the job go? Because although they've said it's good and you may have seen a written reference, if you just can kind of question them, but there was this one element where they were late 2 days or 3 days and it did push the job over a day, but all in all it was good. You can then kind of use that to kind of gauge whether it's right for you to use that contractor. And again, we've done exactly the same. Put this form together. It's free to download on our website. Kind of covers all the questions that we just discussed. You can put your logo on it and kind of send it off to any asbestos contractors you're using, just to kind of make them jump through the hoops and kind of prove their competency before you let them on your next project. Or if you can't be bothered with any of that, we here at Acorn, we can remove that asbestos headache. We offer full asbestos removal project management. Kind of we take the headache away. We use asbestos contractors all the time, so we know who's pricing well. We know who's good for a good fit for the type of asbestos project that you're looking to get. We know who's good at doing certain jobs and who's not. Lots of people always look at big asbestos contractors and think they're going to be perfect for every job, but they sometimes don't do small jobs very well. It's kind of using that kind of industry knowledge that we've got to get you the best fit. Again, we're always vetting our contractors. They have to get onto our approved list. So if they, any of that criteria slips, they're removed from our approved and they have to reapply. We know it's pricing well at the time because there's fluctuations in the market. Sometimes when contractors are quiet, what they'll do is they'll price keener. When they're very busy, the prices go up, and we get because we're talking to these people all the time, we're using them all the time. We get a good steer on where they're at and where they're pricing at the moment in time. And we also, it's a small industry. We also get to hear who's having issues. So if there's an issue, particular issue a contractor's had on a site at the time, we get to hear about that, and we can inform you and get you the right contractor as well. So this kind of takes us up to survey reports. So I'm going to hand over to Ian, and he's going to take you through what exactly should be in an asbestos survey report.
So, asbestos survey reports. HD 264, the survey guide, when it came out in 2010, it listed out various elements that should be included within a survey report. So any asbestos survey that you commission nowadays should have these things. So an executive summary, introduction, scope of work, the general site and survey information, the results and the material risk assessments, conclusions and actions, the bulk analysis results from a UCAS accredited laboratory, and plans. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run you through one of the Acorn survey reports here. So here we've got a management survey. On the front, you can see the site address, or you will be able to see the site address and who it was on behalf of. There's a photo showing you where we've undertaken that. The next kind of section in the report is the overview and the executive summary. This is where the scope and the building details is really important. And this is where you should check the surveyor has understood what you've commissioned them to do. So at any point when you read this, you're kind of a bit unsure whether they've understood your scope of works. This is the point to go back and check it. And then below that, we've got the asbestos containing materials that are listed in risk order with the highest risk score at the top. Another area that is kind of often overlooked but shouldn't be, it's equally as important of where asbestos is to where it isn't, or where it's unknown. So this is for no access areas. So here are a couple of no access areas listed, and this is if the surveyor couldn't, get into a door because it's locked or something like that. This is where it would be listed. So for the project, asbestos needs to be presumed that it's in that location until it's proven that it isn't. So that's vital to know, not only where the asbestos is, but also, like I say, where it isn't. Here we've got a couple of data sheets just showing you how ours work. All the building floor room information there, a photograph of what we sampled. The material risk assessment, you can see with the algorithm scoring. So the one on the left is given a material score of 4, which is very low, and the one on the right is 8, which is a medium risk. Any comments in there that the surveyor believes they can kind of add extra information, they'll put that in there for you. And then recommendations at the bottom of what they're recommending for those products. And then you've got an asbestos register. This essentially is all the information from those data sheets in a tabular format with the action on the end of what's actually required. So it'd be manage, remove, remediate, those kind of things would be on there. And then here is a certificate of analysis from a UCAS accredited lab. You'll see the samples and the sample numbers. They refer back to what is in that report, and it's got the analysis result at the end. As you can see, the one at the bottom is no asbestos detected. The others are chrysotile, crosstalk, etc. And then here we've got a plan. This is one of the main points that the guidance, when it came out in 2010, tried to clear up a little bit. As you can see on our plan, we've got a red hashed asbestos items and blue for no access and presumed. Now, the reason for this, you can see clearly straight away what is asbestos and what isn't. And also when you print out this plan, the different hatching is a different way. So if on site the contractors photocopy it into black and white, you can still tell what is asbestos and what is either not accessed or presumed. So onto the regulations. Came into force in 2012. They replaced the old 2006 regs, and the updated regulations brought in essentially a couple of new elements. So now in the industry, we've got non-licensed materials, non-licensed notifiable materials, and then fully licensed and notifiable materials. So I'm going to go over the main regulation points here. There's 3 types of training: asbestos awareness, training for non-licensable, and training for licensable works. And each type of training is specific to the task. So if you've got asbestos awareness training, it doesn't mean you can go and carry out works. So asbestos awareness training is required to be given to any employee who could foreseeably expose them to asbestos, but also anyone who may influence the works being carried out. So that could be managers, bursars, anybody like that, who can essentially change how work is undertaken. So essentially this is the list. It's anyone and everyone, and at the bottom, other trades that may sometimes think they don't need it, but they actually do: architects, building surveyors, professions just like that, as well as all the ones you would expect. So carpenters, electricians, people like that. There is an exemption. If you can demonstrate, and if you only ever work in buildings that are built post 2000, then you don't need awareness training. However, in reality, most trades go from building to building, so that's why trades and architects need that asbestos awareness training. So how often should it be undertaken and refreshed? Well, once you've had it, it should be refreshed annually as part of a training needs analysis. It doesn't necessarily have to be the full course again. However, a lot of our clients do like to go over the full course yearly, and they just create that as part of their kind of annual training that they undertake, because a lot of the time clients aren't like us. They're not dealing with asbestos day in and day out. So therefore they feel that everybody that works for them should undergo the full course again, because it might be once in a blue moon that they actually come across a project with asbestos in. So the prohibition regulations: asbestos was finally banned in November 1999, and it covered products which asbestos was intentionally added, and it also applied to the use of new asbestos, but existing asbestos could be managed accordingly. So, and then this regulation 4, is kind of the one that covers off how that asbestos should be managed accordingly. So number 1, should take reasonable steps to find out if the products contain asbestos, or number 2, presume products to contain asbestos unless there's strong evidence otherwise. So the easiest way to comply with that is have a survey done. Make and keep up to date a record of the location and condition of the asbestos containing products. So again, the easiest way to comply with that is have a survey done, and then you get a register. Next, assess the risk of anyone being exposed, so their priority risk assessments. Now, they should be carried out by the client. However, we can carry out those on behalf of the client, but what the client needs to do is review those. So we can take the information, we can look at the area and kind of educated guess and understand that it's an office, it's used by 2 people, it's, used for 8 hours a day. However, the client may know other information that at night it's not an office anymore, it's a store cupboard or a workshop or whatever. So perhaps that priority risk system isn't 100% correct. Number 5, prepare a management plan, details how you're going to actually manage the asbestos that's been identified in the survey report. And then number 6, take necessary steps to put the plan into action. 7, periodically review and monitor the plan and any arrangements to act on it so that the plan remains relevant and up to date. And number 8, this is probably the most important, provide the information on the location of the asbestos to anybody who needs it and anyone who is liable to disturb it as part of their works. And then regulation 5, this is another regulation that's kind of similar to Reg 4, but it comes at it from a different point of view. So prior to any intrusive works, an appropriate assessment should be undertaken to confirm if asbestos is present or not. And employers have the duty to identify asbestos before work starts. No demo, maintenance or other works be carried out prior to having that asbestos assessment first. And if the information isn't available from the client or not reliable, then the employer has a responsibility to either get a survey and identify it or presume it is. Now, what Regulation 4 is looking at from a commercial, non-domestic premise side of the fence, the responsibility is on the duty holder for managing the asbestos. But Reg 5 is on the side of the employer. So it could be a refurb contractor sending his workers into a property to undertake a refurbishment. On the domestic front, if you're doing works at Mrs. Smith's property and you ask Mrs. Smith, have you got an asbestos survey report? No, she hasn't. I wouldn't expect her to. But instead of just sending the workers in to crack on, the responsibility falls back on that employer to take stock, either ask Mrs. Smith to procure an asbestos survey report, or they procure an asbestos survey themselves to identify the presence of asbestos. And then when they've got that information, then they can go and start works. So overall, that's it. What we're going to do, we're going to jump back on now and answer any questions that you've got.